I'm going to tickle your funny bone tonight with American humor. Today's guest is Professor Joan Kellerman of the UMass-Dartmouth English Department. Professor Kellerman teaches English, poetry, comedy, American satire, the Beat Generation, Jack Kerouac, literature and psychology, and God help us, the 1960s. Humor has been described as a concern with contradictions of the human physiological and psychological response to contradiction, although that's somewhat controversial, but there are many different types of contradictions that humor deals with. Professor Kellerman, what is humor? What is humor?
Humor is humor is different than comedy. So I would say that humor is I don't know how to put it. Yeah, I would say that number one, there's like a sense of I think an interesting way to start would be we think things are humorous or funny or amusing, and then you have the concept of that's really funny. And what I'm saying is that the word funny is a great word. He's really funny. He makes me laugh as one way we use it. But we also have another thing that I have discovered is a link into what profound issues are at the base of humor and satire and comedy. And that is that we also have this concept with the word funny, where say, hey, I'm feeling a little funny today, meaning I feel a little odd. I don't know if I just feel a little queasy or something. I don't know, I feel odd. So we use funny as many ways. So I feel a little funny today, meaning I feel a little odd. I don't know, I just feel off. So comedy is a way of comedy and satire and humor are the fact that we have like two sides of life, the sad and the happy, and at least. And you always have a comedy mask with a smile, and the crying tragic mask with the frown. So you have comedy and tragedy as two opposite sides, and there's a link between very, very I would say very serious and very light comedy. There's all different forms of comedy. But I would say that the main thing is that comedy is I would like to quote a great quote that I love about comedy. Life is a tragedy for those who feel. It's a comedy for those who think.
Is there anything in your personal life or in the culture that got you interested in teaching comedy and satire?
Well, I got interested before I started teaching in comedy because I lived through Vietnam as a young person, and I was in grad school when the Vietnam War was raging, and college, and in the 60s, and I was wondering, hey, how have writers and authors and people throughout history dealt with inhumanity and cruelty and violence and war and horror and and negative experience? How have people throughout history, in the great writers, how have they dealt with the negative, sad things like war and killing and murder and violence and Vietnam related? In other words, hey, here I am studying English lit and poetry and lovely love poems and sonnets and everything. How is that going to relate to this horrible thing that's happening in this culture in the 60s? And then I started really realizing there were people who had expressed anger in their writing and annoyance and dissatisfaction throughout their writing. And I got into reading people like Jonathan Swift, was an early satirist from in Ireland who wrote about the oppression of the Irish and fighting the English and starvation and things. And basically, there were lots of people throughout history who, like Swift, who tried to express indignation. So basically, I would say is Swift wrote his own gravestone, and this is one of the inspirations for me. And he wrote his own epitaph, and he has gone to where fierce indignation can lacerate his heart no more. In other words, I got into comedy and satire because of Vietnam, and then I read Swift said he was annoyed at the starvation and poverty of the Irish under the English, and he was an Anglican priest actually, and anyway he got into he became a writer. I mean he was a writer, famous writer, but he wrote a lot of satire, and I love so he has a lot of satiric writing, but he wrote his own gravestone, which is he has gone to where fierce and so we don't value anger in our culture. We don't value.
That's a big jump from comedy.
No, it's not.
No?
No, because you have to. Comedy is based on making fun of those who are in power, who are oppressing you. In other words, instead of punching people and in the face, you mock them. So recently, Saturday Night Live had Alex Baldwin doing a mock version of a mockery of Trump,
president. Yeah, I
of the
saw
president,
that.
and it annoyed Trump tremendously. So the only and Michael Moore, the comic writer and political activist, said the only thing that gets Trump really upset is when people make fun of him. So the way you take a horrible, oppressive killer, person without human emotion, human feelings, and no empathy for other people, the way you can bring him down is by making fun of him, and that's really basically what the great comics have done all throughout history. Is you want to take the worst, horrible, oppressive person, and instead of blowing them up with a bomb, you blow them up with comedy. You blow them up, you explode them. You make fun of them, and you mock the person who's oppressing you.
Well, there was a 60s writer named Saul Alinsky who wrote a book, Rules for Radicals, and he said you should ridicule your political opposition.
That's exactly what it's right. You ridicule, mockery, and making fun of. They use the same word. You could say he's funny. I feel funny, but you can also make fun of people. To make fun of people, so I would say what's his name? Guy who did the producers, the Jewish. Who's the I can't. Anyway, some of the let's see, it'd be Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
Mel Brooks did
Woody Allen.
Mel Brooks did something called Springtime for Hitler.
Yeah.
He said he lived through the horrible thing of Hitler destroying the Jews in the Holocaust and putting everyone in gas chambers. And he said, well, what we need, what I want to do is, my ultimate aim, he said, is to make Hitler funny.
But is there...
So he did this thing called Hitler on Ice. So he does this thing with Adolf Hitler and all the Nazi people behind him on ice skates, skating around and doing, absurd, crazy stuff. But he made him look funny on ice skates, and he had like Hitler with the.
Is there a limit, though? Is there a limit to humor? That is, are there things so serious that you should not use comedy to comment upon them?
Well, he got criticized for that.
Yeah.
Because they said, oh, you shouldn't, that's, he's too serious to do that.
Do you agree?
No.
So you think it's unlimited then?
I think it's how you do it. And the more serious it is, the more you have to be aware of the taboos. And the other great person for the tabooed comedy would be Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce was the originator of so I have actually a book in here. This is this is really a great book on Bruce, and I was just because Bruce is one of the most brilliant satirists of our day.
Would you say that Bruce's humor is tame compared to today's humor? Is he like passé? You know?
No,
No?
he's not. He was a satirist, and he satirized the same thing George Orwell did in. He satirized our use of language. So he's the first person that said we have these words we call dirty words, and then you were not allowed to say shit and fuck on TV, and so he does things like sex jokes. Like he does this thing. To is a preposition, come as a verb. To is a preposition, come as a verb. To is a preposition, come as a verb. Did you come? Did you come good? Did you come? So he does all these sex jokes and things, saying, you know what? It's all words. It's like this bullshit about we're not allowed to say certain words. Certain things are dirty, and he points out how our language is crazy. So that's basically what a lot of the wit and wordplay and stuff in comedy is based on that. It's like doing like jokes on, and then there's places you cannot. So anyway, Lenny Bruce was the first person to point out our use of language is crazy, and things that are forbidden and allowed, and so forth. They're very interesting because he was the originator. Then George Carlin studied him. And he does this bit, the comedian George Carlin does this thing, that's the 6 words you can't say on TV. And he does
I remember that.
whole rap on that. That's where it comes from. So people started saying, a lot of our hang-ups are expressed in the way we use language and the euphemisms we use. So we don't take a shit. We, when we have to go to the bathroom, we don't say, I have to piss. We say, I have to powder my nose.
Yeah.
So we have euphemisms.
We have to go to the restroom.
Right,
the
ladies'
ladies'
room. The restroom, exactly.
Yeah.
And powder your nose, and that.
You can't use the word toilet.
And things like that. So usually the taboo things are sex, and taboo topics that are covered with euphemisms would be sex, bathroom, and violence. So in Vietnam, when they obliterated the Vietnamese villages, they say, and bombed everyone to smithereens, they said, we pacified the populace. So you take a word like we pacified them. I mean, you killed everyone. But you don't say we bombed them and they exploded and their guts flew out into the sky. No, you pacified them. So you calm it down, and everything is euphemized.
Were euphemism used in World War II? Because our bombing of civilians
Yes.
in World War II was much more intense, I think.
Yeah, it was used way back, and I mean or George Orwell read about this article. This essay called Politics in the English Language. The English language has millions of ways to avoid taboo topics.
Yeah.
So you have all those, words that if you're not allowed to say fuck, you'll have.
Well, there's 600,000 words in the English
Right.
language. There's plenty to choose from. If you don't like
Plenty
one,
to
you can
choose
get
with.
another.
It's amazing. And then, the euphemism covers up also death and destruction, not just dirt. Not just sex and stuff. So it'd be like, instead of going to, when you go to the, you go to the funeral home, you'll be a funeral director. and things like that. So you have like all these words like,
Yeah.
instead of saying he dropped dead and had a
Passed
heart
away,
attack,
yeah.
he passed away. So you have all
That
these
always
words.
bothered me when I was a kid.
Yes,
you know?
he just passed away. He went to a better world, this kind of thing. So you have
It's like he went
euphemisms.
upstairs. you
So
know?
it's usually for pain, discomfort, and violence. And the thing about American humor that's interesting is it's always connected to something. There's a aggressive violence level to it.
Is there something? Is humor unique to Western civilization?
No, it's universal. It's all every culture has some version of comedy and satire.
You don't happen to know, let's say, any traditional African jokes? maybe?
Not really. I don't know.
Anything from another culture that might sound unusual to American ears?
Oh yeah, I think that the things that are taboo in let's say Arabic culture, Arabic culture, are religion topics, but you're allowed to satirize politicians, and there's certain. In other words, you're not allowed to satirize God.
Yeah.
So it's like that whole thing with the cartoon, Danish cartoonist who did a mock cartoon of
Right.
Muhammad. So every culture has an area that's, you're not allowed to do that, but you're allowed to do this. And every culture finds a way around it. And one of my students just gave me a name of a series on television that goes into different cultures. Every culture has different taboo areas and areas that you're allowed to make fun of and are not allowed to.
Is Western civilization unique in the extent of humor that is common in our culture? In other words, do traditional cultures that
Right.
don't have our tradition of reason,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
they have much less humor? In other words, is humor to some extent a product of man's capacity to reason, which is stressed
Yeah.
in the West?
Right, it is,
So
yeah.
that we're more objective about things, so we're more aware
Yeah.
of what should be and what should not be.
Morality, I mean, like a moral.
Well, I suppose that would be a part
you mean
of
good
it.
and evil kind of thing? A sense of what is taboo or allowed.
I was thinking to the extent that
Yeah.
in traditional cultures they're not keenly aware of the difference between reality and fantasy. They kind of, in their minds, it kind of flows
Yeah.
back and forth.
Yeah.
Whereas in the West, there's a big tradition of that,
Being
a serious,
reasonable, yeah, yeah.
systematic,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
philosophical. It would seem to me that would be a
Right.
context for humor.
Yeah. I think
Look at
yeah.
Aristophanes, the clouds, criticizing Plato.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, but also our art has always been like, the concept of being an artist has always been a little bit.
Funny?
Yeah,
Really?
because otherwise they wouldn't have forbidden the artist Plato from the because he appealed to emotion more than.
Well, I know Plato didn't like art.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
But Aristotle did, and the Greeks, obviously, with drama, they worshiped
Right.
art.
Right. Exactly.
Well, I'm not sure how far that follows.
Well, I don't know to what degree, one side of
And the
Western.
Greek tragedies are not funny. I mean, unless
Right.
unless
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
very bizarre.
Right. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's a strange, but the other element is a lot of comedy is about let's put it this way, authoritarian, the authoritarian rules set up by, let's say, by a Trump type person or Hitler, someone who's very authoritarian, and and the one way to get them upset is to make fun of them. So a lot of things are authoritarian, and a lot of things are again with comedy. So you could say you're being foolish. Don't be so foolish. Don't be so silly. Don't be so, be serious. Be silly, instead of silly. And then you have the idea that I would say the first authority everyone has is their parents, and and they, so we're brought up with thing of your father says to do such and thing, and your mother says to do such, and then you have the child's. But why? I saw two guys kissing, Mommy. How come two men? I thought, babies only come from man and woman. There's two guys. In other words, you have a child is the first fool. The first comic, because the child asked the naive question: how are babies born? Things that like grown-ups know that. In other words, the child is the first person to question stuff. How come we have to die, moms? In other words, your child, being a child, you don't get it, and everyone's telling you what to do. You have to do this. You have to go to school. You have to do these rules. You have to do this. You have to do it over this way, and then you start rebelling as a kid. It's a natural form of life because you don't want to be under the power of your parents. So part of the rebellion of comedy is that of joke is that you can make fun of the authority figure.
But is all humor necessarily an attack on authority? Isn't some bit what you might call innocent? Somebody,
right?
I shouldn't
Yeah.
something happens,
Oh, yeah.
and you're not insulting somebody. It's just that there's a humorous situation.
Usually, it's incongruity.
Yeah.
There's yeah, as you say, there's all different ways to describe it, but it's that A doesn't measure up with B, basically. There's an incongruity and disparity and disjunction. And a lot of it is about the absurdity of life.
Yeah.
So actually, let's see, it would be Philip Roth, the writer who just died recently, said he always admired Kafka. Because
Is he funny?
Well, for the following reason, he said, what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is that it ends. So the ultimate joke is life.
Oh, sounds like Woody Allen.
Right. Kafka said the meaning of life is that it ends.
I just saw Annie Hall, so I'm aware.
Right. It's really true. I mean, in other words, that if you think of that's the ultimate joke, is that you live, you think everything's cool, and all of a sudden you get hit by a car, and it's over. The instability of life itself is the ultimate life joke.
Well, that's a nihilist perspective on humor.
It is true. That's the quote, Philip Roth quoting Kafka. Yeah, I mean, it's also, it's much more, what is a joke, what is funny, what is amusing, that's a different, what amuses you. And then...
Doesn't that get back to values then? So
Yeah.
it's not just the psychology of it, it's what are your values? I mean, you
Yeah.
talked about, let's say, humor would be the way that the oppressed person or group
Right.
gets back at the
Right.
oppressor. But
Yes.
then that begs the question of who is the oppressor and who is
Right.
the oppressee?
Right.
Then you have a division of
Exactly.
values, all right?
Right.
Are you going to take the Nazi side against the Jews, the Jewish side against the Nazis?
Right.
Because
Usually like a good example, there's different categories, let's say, of humor. And so one of my favorite would be ethnic humor. So in the U.S. we have now, like we have every history of all this immigrant groups, and it's not a country with one identity, one ethnicity. So it's a multiple ethnicities. You have Italians, you have this, you have Japanese, you have 100 million. We have hundreds of different ethnic groups, and but within that you have tradition of lots of people who are the white power group, let's put it that way, made fun of immigrants and foreigners, and funny accents, and every no matter what, whoever is in power makes fun of those who are not in power.
And you can presume that the immigrants made fun of American mores.
Yeah, I mean,
They brought their
yeah.
own values to America, and
Right.
they saw the way that Americans were acting,
Right.
and I'm sure they had their own
Oh, yeah.
humorous perspective
So
on it.
that's the thing is the greatness of American humor is based on the fact that we're since the beginning of American history, the founding fathers wrote satire.
That I didn't know. Well,
Oh yeah,
well,
so
maybe
Ben Franklin,
yeah.
Hamilton, or Jefferson. They all wrote a lot of satiric things.
About the British,
England,
perhaps?
British about the British, and also mocking anti-Indian stuff. Mocking, like Mark Twain was
Yeah.
one of the most famous.
So that was
and-
later on in our history.
Yeah, late 1800s. Yeah, but you have a tradition where you're made up of immigrants, but you're also dealing with how to assimilate people into it. And
If I told you the joke, if I said Obama and Trump walked into a bar,
right,
what would you think? Would you know where I was going with that joke? It just sounds fun, doesn't it?
Yeah,
just that
yeah.
one line
Right,
sounds
right.
funny.
Yeah.
You're anticipating something
exactly,
because of the contradiction there. Well,
exactly.
How could a theory of humor handle that?
Well, humor is, you mean a serious comedian? Well, that's why I would say that there's always in contemporary especially, but I would say since World War II, there's a liberal side to satire. It's always mocking the oppressor throughout history, and that's the thing is that's why it's always it's always attacking.
Well, the liberals went into the humanities.
Right. And just being able to read and write and use words with wit and not literal. So basically, to make jokes, it takes a lot of humor.
But then there's folk humor too,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I'm sure if you went into poorly educated areas, they would have their own humor about those city slickers.
Sure. Oh yeah. There's urban and country, and there's always American is always the American to the European and to himself is the country bumpkin.
Yeah.
So the frontiersman, and so when Swift does this thing called the modest proposal, he said, "I have a great solution on how we can stop the starvation of the Irish by the English." All these Irish are dropping dead and having 400 babies, and they're starving to death, and there's no money, no food, for them. What we can do is, he said, a great American acquaintance of mine told me that he's heard the Americans have a solution. You take a young, well-fed baby, and you can. If you get it before it's 9 months old, you can stew it up in a stew and use it for food to feed the other starving people. So take the baby, so they're starving and dying anyway. Use them for food to feed everyone else.
How was
and
that?
Then he goes, you can. The American told me you can take a young and the flesh of a young baby is great in a fricassee, a ragu, and a roast. But he doesn't say you're just going to eat the baby. He said, no, we're going to have it in a fricassee, a roast, and a ragu, and a little sauce on the side. A little hot sauce helps a little.
How was that humor received when it came out? That's,
People didn't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some people did. But a lot of people, the cannibals. But basically, that's basically you say the opposite of what you mean. He doesn't mean you're going to do that. He means, isn't it horrible that we're starving people and we haven't, But instead of saying, isn't it bad that we have to starve and no one's taking care of anyone and everyone's dying? No, we're not going to say that. In other words, instead of saying, let's be nice and care about one another. No, let's eat everyone. So it's I would call the Colbert Effect. You pretend to be a fascist and who's going to eat it, babies, but you don't really mean it.
You have to look then at the culture to understand the humor then. Is that it?
Yeah,
Is the
it's also wit. It's like you pretend to be a right-winger.
Thank you very much, Professor
Colbert,
Kellerman.
when he did the Colbert Show, played a right-wing Trump-type person. And did, in other words, he played the right wing. He came across as a conservative instead of a liberal. So he would play the role of just like he'd do a mock version of the right wing, similar to what Swift does. Saying, I think the solution is to eat everyone. They're all starving to death. So, in other words, he'd say the opposite of what he meant.
Well,
So, it's a weird thing. It's that you have to be able to get irony and that you don't mean it literally. You're meaning the opposite of what you're saying.
Thanks a lot for coming. Our show is over.
All righty.
Yeah, I know. I
Yeah.
should have told you. It goes fast. Once you get into it, if you're really interested in
Right,
it,
I
it
know.
goes fast.